Hey everyone, it's Brian from Exact Cybersecurity and IT. Welcome to another video where we help you understand all things cybersecurity. Today we're going to talk about two hacks that happened recently. And the reason I want to cover them is A, because I didn't cover them, and B, because I think businesses can learn a lot from these events. And I'm going to cover the MGM hack and the Johnson Controls hack in today's video. I'm going to talk about both hacks simultaneously, what happened, and what businesses can really learn to protect themselves from these types of events. Before I jump into the MGM and Johnson Controls hack, remember to like the video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out, helps other people find this content. And also share your comments. And if you have any questions, drop them below. We'd love to hear from you. So let's talk about the MGM hack. MGM, major casino operation out of Las Vegas, had a hack recently in the last few weeks where it really shut them down. We're going to talk about what that looked like here in a couple of minutes, but let's talk about how they got hacked in the first place. Well, it was initially thought that there was obviously some kind of configuration mishap or something like that. But when it came to light, it was really a social engineering attack on one of their call centers that they have for their company. This is interesting and why I wanted to cover this hack now, because we know a lot more about it than we did when this initially happened. And we know that they were compromised because of a phone call into a call center. And this is something that we're seeing ever so increasingly across the board with lots of different businesses when it comes to cyber attacks. Cyber criminals are always trying to stay one step ahead of businesses. And the problem is that businesses are really far behind on this stuff when it comes to protecting their networks, their data, and the things that they're entrusted by their customers and their clients to keep safe. While businesses struggle today to keep up with the demands of cybersecurity, while many of them haven't even bought into investing, the cyber criminals are way ahead. They're already on kind of like version 2 and 3 and 4 of the playbook on how to hack companies around the world and in the United States. And companies are still on version 1. Businesses are way behind the times in understanding where this thing has evolved to today at the end of 2023. And when you're talking about things like call centers and people being socially engineered at call centers or at companies like we saw with Twitter a while back, you really got to question can businesses keep up the pace of the cyber criminals? And right now, the current trajectory I see, the answer to that is simply no, that businesses in the US are in trouble. So before I get into what I think MGM could have or should have done and what your business should do to not fall victim to an attack like MGM, let's talk about what happened with MGM and kind of where things are at for them right now. So a couple of things happen here with MGM that are really important to discuss. And the first thing is that MGM decided not to pay the cyber criminals. And here's why they came to that determination. It's estimated that they lost about $100 million in this event. I think that price tag is going to increase. And there's a couple interesting things that the CEO of MGM has come out and said that I want to talk about today in the video. First things first is they came out and they touted the fact that they feel like they got ahead of this very quickly and shut things down before they could get to certain things, which they feel like help prevent the hackers from getting to things like banking and credit information. However, we don't know what the hackers really have. And because MGM didn't negotiate, either they know data was not exfiltrated or they just don't care. And if they don't care, we're going to find out what was in that data very soon. And we could find out that banking and credit information was in there in some way, shape, or form. Remember, when people go to Las Vegas and gamble, some of them are not small-time gamblers, and a lot of them have lines of credit open with these casinos. Casinos also employ thousands and thousands of people, and all of this information that they collect from those individuals involve things like social security numbers and personal information that a cyber criminal can use to perpetrate other crimes like identity theft and things like that. So you really have to understand that even though they're saying like, hey, we think we did a good job here, there's a lot to this that we don't know and needs to be figured out. And we're only going to know that over the next coming months as they release more information, as more things are revealed to them through this attack by forensic people. The other interesting thing that the CEO of MGM came out and said is that they feel like cyber insurance is going to cover this event for them. It's also interesting because the CEO added a comment that he said he can't wait to see next year's bill or what next year's bill is going to look like, kind of saying like, we know that our cyber insurance rates are going to go up as a result of us filing this claim. So we'll see what the insurance company actually will do here. They may be saying that they will pay it, but I have a pretty good feeling that they are going to tell MGM that we're not going to pay all of it. And I guarantee you that part of the decision to not pay hackers and to just move forward in this so-called like rebuilding process was probably at the recommendation of the cyber insurance company. And I'm going to get into why that is right now. So when you're dealing with a ransomware response event, you have to look at a lot of different things. And it really does become a business decision for the people involved in making this decision on whether or not they're going to do things like pay the hackers, try to recover, or just simply rebuild from scratch. Now, I can tell you that in the last 12 months, we've probably seen more business owners in the ransomware response events that we've been involved with here at Exact Cybersecurity, where you sit down and you start to look at this stuff with the business owners and decision makers, and they start to realize that regardless of whether they pay the ransom, start negotiating with the hackers, start looking at their disaster recovery and business continuity options, they're starting to look at and weigh the cost of completely rebuilding their system and whether or not they're going to have to do that, which in most cases, you're going to have to do that. So you're going to have to buy all new computers, all new infrastructure. Maybe you don't even rebuild where you're currently at. Maybe you go somewhere else like the cloud or some other infrastructure environment where you host your things. These types of events really kind of fast forward any decision making around infrastructure upgrades for companies. And we see that a lot. We see companies who maybe neglect IT. They have a ton of what we call technology debt. And technology debt is simply just ignoring or not paying your fair share, so to speak, when it comes to technology. Companies far and wide try to skimp on technology and cybersecurity, especially within technology. And all we say at our company when we educate prospects and customers that we talk to is that you're building technology debt by not addressing these issues. And that debt clock is constantly running and running. And the hope is for most businesses is that eventually they can get to that problem and take care of it. But a lot of companies today are dealing with cyber attacks as a result of the technology debt, which only further increases how quickly that technology debt clock runs. Because if you get hit with a cyber attack, your technology debt bill is going to increase and skyrocket and make your head spin when it does. So the reality of it is when you're hit with a cyber attack, and you're faced with whether or not you're going to go through this like recovery process and try to put things back on the systems that you have, things are so bad at most companies in the US that they only have logical choice when it comes to a business discussion on dollars and cents and ones and zeros and what makes the most sense for us for where we're at. And that's most CEOs making the decision to not negotiate because they know they're not going to pay because they're just going to spend all this money rebuilding anyway. And I also think that that's the lesson learned by a lot of cyber insurers out there who provide cyber insurance, and they're looking at a situation and they're saying, well, you're going to have to rebuild anyway. So don't even go the route of negotiating and talking to cyber criminals because you're going to have to rebuild your systems. There's only one caveat to this that I want to point out, and that's in the case of double extortion and when you know your data has been exfiltrated. Because MGM decided not to negotiate, and I'm not really hearing anything about data being released, I kind of am led to believe that this was just a system outage event and not a double extortion event like we've seen in other attacks. So that's one thing that I believe is probably at play here and why the decisions that were made. And it also goes to show you and illustrate to you that there's a lot of different options and things that can happen within a cyber event that are going to change your decision-making process, which is why it's critically important that businesses start looking at incident response and business continuity, putting plans in place and doing tabletop exercises so they can work through various scenarios and really be crystal clear on how they are going to handle these various scenarios when they come up in their business, because every business, in my mind, is subject and going to be victimized by cyber criminals in some way, shape, or form during their existence here in the near future. They are just getting too good. They're getting too well informed about how these businesses operate on a day in and day out basis. And this whole cyber security thing for most businesses is secondary to everything else that they have going on in their business. So you have a situation where you have cyber criminals where that's all they think about is how I can break into companies and how I can make money off of them and extort them and make sure that we get paid and things like that. Businesses are thinking about their own growth, their own operations, not cybersecurity. It's very much a second or a back burner type of conversation for many, many businesses here in the US. And that's why we're seeing the level of cyber crime that we're seeing today. MGM's looking at a $100 million loss here. I am going out on a limb here and saying it's going to be a lot more than that. And I think they're going to be surprised what they learn over the next couple months here. And we'll keep you updated as anything changes. But we're going to jump into another big hack this week, and it's Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls International. They are a giant building automation with ties to many large enterprise businesses and the US government and other governments around the world. Now, when this cyber attack happened on Johnson Controls, yeah, it was a pretty big deal. It was out there in the news, probably not as much as MGM because it didn't impact nearly as many consumer level people who like to gamble and things like that. But this caught the attention of our federal government and more specifically DHS. And why did it get the attention of DHS? Well, Johnson Controls has a lot of data about government facilities. There's no way in the world that our federal government wants some of these things that Johnson Controls may have access to, like building plans, floor plans, how vents and airways are run through certain buildings in the federal government, even state and local governments, and even stores and corporate headquarters, and all kinds of things that this company could potentially have in their network that has now been breached. They actually have Department of Homeland Security building floor plans, and they could have potentially been compromised in this attack. It's been suggested that Johnson Controls is dealing with a ransomware attack, and this is a big problem, and why I wanted to bring it up for businesses, because this is another thing where the hackers are way ahead of the common business out there in the US when it comes to dealing with things around cybersecurity, and this is called a third-party type of attack or a supply chain attack. What's going on here is cyber criminals are getting really smart about what we call kind of drive-by hack. They get into maybe a network of one of your suppliers or one of your partners or one of your customers, and they learn something in their network that then allows them to go after you in some way, shape, or form. I recently saw an event at a business where cyber criminals logged into an email of somebody who was hacked that was part of this response that my company was involved in. It was a simple company email hack. Somebody got into somebody's Office 365 account, but what the cyber criminal was able to do is two things. One, they accessed the email without anybody knowing. There was a token theft thing that I've done another video on. You can find it here, or somebody will link it right over here somewhere. And you can check out how hackers get into something like your email without your username or password or MFA. And this is a thing. And this happened to this company, and the hacker was in there for a few days. They learned who this company was doing business with, and then they were able to craft an invoice and send it to a third-party company. And in that invoice, there was a link to malware. And because this other company received many invoices from the company that was initially breached, the person who clicked on the email didn't think twice about it because it was the normal course of business. It came from the email address of the person that normally sends these invoices. It looked exactly like the invoice, except it just instructed the user to do one thing differently than they normally have to do, which is click on something inside of the document. And that led them to a malicious site that downloaded malware to their computers, and it ultimately ended up into this third-party company getting ransomware because one of their partners got hacked, their email got hacked, and then they fell for a phishing or a social engineering attempt. These are the kinds of things that are happening today in the world when it comes to supply chain types of attacks. Companies have to be aware of this, which is why you need to do third-party risk assessment. Companies around the world need to do third-party risk assessments and understand, especially if there's something critical in your business that you don't necessarily run in-house, but you need that to run. You really need to understand what their cybersecurity posture looks like, because if they get hacked or they go down for an extended period of time, how are you going to operate? How are you going to continue to conduct business so it doesn't impact your operations or your customers don't notice that you're struggling through some kind of an event or problem? Because when one of those two things happens, or both, that's when a company usually has a public relations nightmare to deal with, as the information then becomes public and people start questioning what's happening over at this company because I can't do X, Y, and Z anymore. At the end of the day, we have two major corporations who were hacked in the last 2 weeks that hit the news. But the reality of it is that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of companies attacked every single day that you don't hear about. We get to hear about them because a lot of times companies are calling us for help to get out of those situations. And while we love to help them, we really love it if people would just do the right thing and not get hacked in the first place. When I say do the right thing, what are those things? While I mentioned things like social engineering attacks and third-party supply chain attacks and making sure that you're doing third-party risk assessments, what I didn't mention about the MGM hack is the fact that there are identity verification systems now. So if you operate any kind of a call center, or you use a call center, you call into a help desk, you call a vendor for support, think about things that you do in your business where you're calling somebody and then they're accessing your systems, or maybe they're installing software on your computer, or they're doing something. How are you verifying that that person is really you? Or how are maybe your IT company verifying that your employees are your employees who are calling your IT department or your IT vendor? This is a big thing that we see all the time, where an IT company has an IT department with a help desk and they call into the help desk and that's not really the employee. They're impersonating the employee, hoping that they can get some level of access to something in the company by way of the help desk, thinking that they're helping the actual employee when they're actually helping a cyber criminal. So there are ways that you can do what's called identity verification, software that's in place where you can use things like facial recognition, do things like multi-factor authentication, where the person sent a code via text message and they have to type that in somewhere. So you know that this person is really you. So there's lots of different systems out there for identity verification, but you want to make sure you have something like this in place, because if you don't, you run the risk of ending up like MGM did. But the reality of it is, guys, is those things are kind of advanced for where I see most companies today when it comes to cybersecurity. So I'm going to give the practical tips that businesses should be doing, or at least you should be looking out for if you don't run your business and you just work in your business. Is my company doing these things? And maybe you can go to them and suggest that you do them so you can get off version 1, or maybe get on version 1, wherever, depending where you're at right now. You might not be doing anything at all, which is not uncommon, but get from version 1 to version 2 to version 3 and catch up with these hackers so you don't have to be dealing with what MGM and Johnson Controls are dealing with in the past couple of weeks. Number 1, stay updated. Make sure you have a way to check if you need updates. And I'm talking about anything plug into the internet or connect to the internet. Anything that goes on Wi-Fi, anything that gets an Ethernet cable plugged into it, you better have a way or a plan of knowing what needs to be updated on that system, whether it's hardware, software, and making sure you have a way to check to see if there's updates or vulnerabilities in those systems. That's called vulnerability management at the end of the day. Doing things as simply as making sure your Windows is up to date all the time, Mac OS is updated all the time, or your Linux is updated all the time, plus whatever endpoint protection you might be using. That's your antivirus software. And if you're using something called antivirus, change to the thing called endpoint. It's a lot better. But you need to make sure that that's updated and running good as well. Multi-factor authentication, I mentioned that before. I kind of mentioned it when I was talking about identity verification. Multi-factor authentication has been around for a while. It's still pretty effective, but it's not a silver bullet. And a lot of people think it is because products like cyber insurance, they ask, are you doing multi-factor authentication? And really, things are changing as they always are in this industry. But with cyber insurance applications, a couple years ago, all you had to do was say, yeah, we have multi-factor authentication, and you would get a policy and you would get a pretty competitive rate as opposed to somebody who's not doing multi-factor authentication or doing anything at all. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have a employee security and awareness training program. And I've done videos on that before. I've also talked about it on my Security Squat podcast. Security and awareness training, just simply put, is informing your employees of the current threat landscape that's out there. Good employee awareness training programs out there don't happen once a year, once a quarter. They happen on a frequent basis. We recommend at least once a week, deliver it in short bursts so people understand it. You benchmark them by giving them quizzes to make sure that they're retaining and understanding the information. But then you also couple that with phishing campaigns that you're running on your own and tracking to see whether or not the things that you're teaching your employees are actually effective. This will help build a culture of cybersecurity in your business so that people start to talk about when things happen, when spam emails come in, when phishing emails come in, when somebody clicks on something that maybe that they shouldn't. It doesn't become something that they feel shamed about. It becomes an open and honest conversation of how we can do better. Make sure you're running your backups. As I mentioned earlier when we talked about the MGM hack, backups are going to be a big thing that determines whether or not you have to negotiate with hackers about paying a ransom. It's a really big factor. When there's no backups, you have no other option. When the backups are no good, you have no other option. So make sure you have backups, but also make sure you have somebody verifying those backups on a regular basis, because it can make the difference on whether or not you have to pay hackers or not, or it can make the difference on how you can recover and what way you can recover. On top of the staying updated, make sure you have a vulnerability management plan or something in place where you can get at least, I would say, twice a year. I would do this as frequently as you feasibly can, but at minimum once a year, somebody should be scanning and evaluating your network for vulnerabilities and letting you know what you need to do to remedy or get rid of those vulnerabilities in your network. This is a big thing, and why I bring it up, because vulnerability exploitation is starting to overtake phishing as the number one way that hackers compromise corporate network. Hackers know companies aren't doing it, and they're taking advantage of it because they're starting to see that it's easier to find vulnerabilities in companies rather than try to trick employees to click on emails. Next one you're going to want to look at is potentially looking at zero trust architecture. Zero trust can happen a lot of different ways. It can happen on the network. It can happen with what applications run on your computer or what can be installed on your computer, what employees or what people can access what in your environment. There's a lot of different ways you can do zero trust today, and zero trust is really becoming the model that a lot of different entities are adopting and recommending. Our own government and DHS is recommending zero trust, and we're seeing a lot of cyber insurers recommend and also give better rates to companies that really can demonstrate that they've implemented and they know how to run zero trust properly within their environment. So it's a little bit of a mature thing. That's more like a version 3, version 4 type of thing for cyber defenders. It's not always going to be that way. It's, eventually that's going to be kind of the norm, but we got to get companies to get there and embrace zero trust concepts in their business. Make sure that you are having incident response plans in place, business continuity plans in place, and that you're doing those tabletops like I mentioned earlier. Practice makes perfect. Communication makes things a hell of a lot easier when you're in the middle of an event. Knowing who to communicate to, knowing who the players are, and not having to make these decisions in the middle of an event, but making them with a clear conscience well before any kind of event happens in your business is where you want to be at when it comes to incident response and making sure your business can recover from any kind of an event, including a cyber attack. collaboration is important from a lot of different aspects. Number one, threat intelligence is becoming a huge piece of how companies are staying ahead of the game, but also threat intelligence is a big piece on how companies are getting through cyber attacks. Threat intelligence is becoming a big part of cybersecurity, and it's very important. And I would highly recommend you look at adding threat intelligence some way in your business. A really good way to start with that is to hire a company like ours to give you and your board and your CEO and your C-suite threat intelligence before an attack, because these types of things are going to happen and you need to stay ahead of them, and you need to know what's out there and what your business should be focusing on and spending their cybersecurity budget on. If there isn't an imminent threat on something, why would you spend money on it versus something that's an absolute imminent threat in your business? How are you even going to know what an imminent threat is in your business? This is where the value of cyber threat intelligence comes in for your business. And it's a pretty cost-effective way to get really smart on how to spend your cybersecurity dollars. And finally, other part of collaboration here is that supply chain I talked about. Make sure you're working with your partners and your vendors and understanding what their cybersecurity posture is and maybe what risks they introduce into your business from an operational and other financial standpoints. This is a huge problem that we see businesses grappling with when another company, not their own, has a problem. You can also collaborate with federal government resources like DHS and the FBI if your company needs help with this. DHS gives you free resources that they will literally give you cybersecurity experts that will help you figure these things out. Now, the difference between using DHS and going the federal government route and getting kind of free help from them is you get put in a queue. So you really don't have a say as to when they're going to get to you. The last DHS representative that I spoke with said for most businesses that want something like a risk assessment from DHS, it's going to be 6, 7, 8, 12 months. If you're talking about getting help with vulnerability management or incident response, if your company isn't really a really big company or isn't involved in the government in some way, unless they view it as a national security threat, the FBI is not really going to get involved. And DHS is your best bet there for free help. But they're even going to tell you that we're not going to work with certain size businesses for certain things. You're not even going to get a call back. That's when your business really needs to turn to the private sector and look for a cybersecurity company to help. As you can see, this cybersecurity digital landscape is ever evolving. It's always changing. Cyber criminals are staying way ahead of the game. Businesses in the US especially are having a really hard time keeping up. But that doesn't mean you got to give up. Try and keep doing the things, seek the help, seek the advice of people like me. I'm going to continue putting videos out like this to keep you educated, to make sure that you understand what threats are out there and what you need to be doing to protect yourself. Stay safe out there. Remember to like and subscribe to our channel. And if you made it this far, check out our event that we're doing with Shark Tank's Robert Herjavec, Small Biz Tech Day Philadelphia. I hope to see you there. Sign up today, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.